Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. We're sitting here in Coral Gables, Florida at the Biltmore Hotel talking to former two-term Florida Governor Jeb Bush. Also has a new book out called The Immigration Wars. He co-wrote it with constitutional law expert Clint Bolick. Governor Bush, he also wrote the cover story of the April edition of Newsmax magazine. It's a pleasure to have you with us to talk about these important issues here.
Thank you, John. Thanks for coming down to visit me here in beautiful Coral Gables.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Always happy to get down here. I want to talk quickly, before we talk about the magazine article, I want to talk about the book, Immigration Wars, Forging an American Solution. Critics say this book, which was written over a year ago, represents a major reversal in your support for the quote-unquote pathway to citizenships for some 11 million people who are living in this country illegally currently. You say the proposals are largely in sync with those of Senators Marco Rubio, Senator Lindsey Graham. Your book has, you've been out there, you've been promoting your book now. Some say there's been a rush to judgment of this book simply because you are a Bush. What do you say to those criticisms?
Well, I think it's safe to say that there was a rush to criticize early when the book hadn't been published and people were opining on it. If people get a chance to read the book, they'll find that this is a comprehensive set of solutions. There's not one element of it that you can look at. It's got to be looked at in its entirety. The basic principle underlining our set of recommendations is that legal immigration should be easier, less costly, and done over a shorter period of time than giving someone a path to legalized status of any kind. That there should be incentives for people to come legally, and the cost of coming illegally should be higher. And if you have that, then people will want to come legally, and they can make a contribution, a full contribution to our economy. We're basically advocating a shift towards a economically driven immigration strategy where we focus on economic growth being the principal reason why we need to reform our immigration system stem to stern.
As opposed to the family kind of based system that we have now, which isn't really yielding what we'd like.
Well, family reunification is a noble tradition, but only America has as its definition of family adult parents and adult brothers and sisters. And so what's happened when that change took place about 40 years ago is we have what's called the chain migration effect. So as people claim their adult family members, then they can claim their adult family members, and 67 to 75% of all legal visa holders come through family reunification. Only 13% come for economic purposes. Canada, our neighbor, has the exact opposite. It has about 15% that come through family and about 75 to 80% that come for economic purposes. We're suggesting we should move towards the Canadian model and still be true to our heritage as a nation, being a nation of immigrants.
And narrowing the definition.
Exactly, narrowing it down to what people think it is, which is spouses and minor children. And if you did that, you'd probably free up 500,000 slots a year that then would allow you to create legal immigration for people that want to come to work. You could create a guest worker program. You could expand H-1B visas. You could give people green cards if the demands in the economy seeking high-skilled labor existed. You could expand dramatically the economic side of immigration, and it would, I think, create at least an additional 1% growth in our economy, and the good Lord knows we need that.
One thing that stood out to me when I read the article, it was a quote here that, today's immigration laws are written for another century in a different kind of economy. And there was one specific law that came to mind, and maybe that's because we're sitting here in Florida, but it was the wet foot, dry foot policy, which is based on a Cold War era, Soviet dominance of Cuba. Would this be one particular issue that needs to be revisited right now?
I don't think it's being revisited in Congress right now. Clearly, if the United States relationship with Cuba changed, which would require a regime change inside of Cuba, if Cuba moved towards a more democratic approach to governance rather than this despotic rule of tyranny, if they moved towards the systems that have created more economic prosperity, then our immigration laws would change, I think, accordingly.
There are, of course, other people who come from other countries that say this is an unfair advantage for Cubans. Do you see their side of the argument?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's clearly unique. There is no other country that has the Cuban Adjustment Act. That's why it's called the Cuban Adjustment Act, not the Nicaraguan Adjustment Act. This is we have incredibly complex immigration laws, and I think we should review all the laws from stem to stern to move it to the 21st century. This one element, I think, will change when our relationship with Cuba changes.
Were there any other specific laws that came to mind for you, and could you give us some examples?
Yeah, you have the temporary protective status, which was temporarily granted, for example, for Central Americans, El Salvadorans, Hondurans, Nicaraguans in the 1980s. We have millions of people that are under this temporary protective status permanently. We should at some point recognize that that's the case, that their children and they themselves, after 20, 25 years, are American. They're here legally, they work, they embrace American values, but they have this temporary status that needs to be adjusted. I would say that's a good example. The idea that we need a guest worker program, which we've had with great success in our past, is another example of a change that would be appropriate. Having 1 million H-1B visa holders, those are those people that have high skills, technology skills, and others that
the people are coming to get educated and then wind up leaving, and far too often.
Some of them do. Some of them come with the skills, and they have a 3 to 6 year period that they can work. And once that work time expires, they're not allowed to stay in the country. So we train them. We may educate them as well, as you said, and then send them off to compete with us. This is something, our brand is tattered in our own minds in the country. People are very, I think, pessimistic, uncharacteristically so for Americans, but America still is the land of opportunity, and high-achieving people with great aspirations should be allowed to come if they can make an immediate contribution to our economy. And that's where I think the focus needs to be, and where the policymakers in Washington seem to be making pretty good progress.
Let's focus on the economy a little bit. And I mean, your article is anything but pessimistic. It's very optimistic, and you talk a lot about growth. And we hear that growth is really the only cure for our problems of the deficit and debt right now. Can we solve those issues without making cuts that people really feel and that hurt, and without raising taxes? Well, can we grow our way out of this economy just by growth alone?
If we grew at 2% more per year than what we're projected, which is anywhere from 1 to 1.5% per year in real terms, we would create a Germany in terms of incremental economic output over in the 10th year. And that Germany would probably be taxed at the current rate, at least, to the tune of about $1 trillion without raising taxes. There is no tax plan that could come close to the exponential nature of revenue collection for high growth. And so the president is rhetorically, I mean, almost every time he has a chance to speak, talks about the need for high growth, but his policies do the exact opposite. His policies have created the most tepid recovery in American modern history. And so the dual effect of high growth creating higher income that's taxed by government at all levels, combined with lessening the demands placed on government that occurs during economic prosperity is a worthy objective. The notion right now is that we have this discussion of austerity versus government spending, when in fact what we ought to be doing is figure out how can we invest in the private sector, creating investment opportunities and job creating opportunities that create the kind of growth that lessens government's involvement in all this. That's what's missing, and I think the president has a duty to outline specifically proposals that will create economic growth. Up till now, I don't think he's done it.
It's hard to be optimistic when you hear about a $16 trillion debt and $1 trillion deficits each year. But are Republicans talking too much about the debt and deficit instead of talking about growth? I
think it's a principled position to say that we have to live within our means. And over time, you can do that, and we should do that. No question that we have fiscal structural problems. But the fastest way to get to that is in combination with high growth. And it's also a winning political message. To embrace the unknown and to embrace the dynamic nature of our economy is something that I think is much better than just saying world coming to end, memo to follow. We should be much more hopeful and optimistic about the future of our country if you just see the trends in the life science area, in telecommunications, in information technology. We're living in the most wondrous time, I think, ever in human history. And the United States is, in most of the exciting parts of the dynamic sides of activity in our society globally, the United States is a leader. We should be excited about the future and creating strategies to assure that we create long-term sustained economic growth, starting with energy, certainly immigration policy, shifting our regulations to the 21st century, a tax code that's simpler, that trusts people to make decisions for themselves, radically changing the path we're on for education. There are a set of policy objectives that we should embrace, not all of which are ideological either. The sad thing is the dysfunction in Washington right now limits the ability, even when there's enough consensus, to move forward.
In Washington, nobody's really taking the lead. We do have to talk about cuts, entitlement cuts in this discussion, and neither party really is taking the lead. Neither party wants to get specific. There are proposals out there, of course, but looking back to the election, Governor Romney was criticized for not putting specifics on the table, not just about entitlement cuts, but also with his tax plan. How do you get specific without getting bogged down in the weeds? And how do you get specific? You know, it's risky politically to get specific on cuts. How do you do it?
So, first of all, you have to inform. You can't just assume that everybody has the set of facts about the situation. Most of the cuts we're talking about are cuts in the growth of spending, not actual cuts. And to be fair about it, there are people in Washington that have proposed specific proposals. Paul Ryan being perhaps the most obvious one, who was Mitt Romney's running mate. And I thought it was a courageous, inspired choice. And they did defend those cuts, so-called cuts,
to a point,
for a while, and then they kind of reverted back to trying to make the election about the president, exclusively about a referendum on his job performance. And elections, it turns out, are also about a choice. And if you don't give people a choice by offering specific proposals that are believable in American politics today, you're not going to win. So. I think the lesson of 2012 is be bold, be specific, persuade. Don't follow polls. Don't be driven by what people's feelings are in the here and now, because those opinions can shift if you make a compelling case. And we need, the entitlement system is unsustainable. There is no one that argues that we can keep doing what we're doing.
Can you give us some specific entitlement reforms that you support, 2 or 3?
Sure. I think we ought to move towards greater flexibility for the states in Medicaid, so that you can create more of a fixed, certain cost, but allow for innovations to take place that right now, given the system, don't exist. Raising the retirement age to reflect the life expectancy increase that's been dramatic. Focusing on maybe looking in return for the broader agreement, means testing some of the entitlement programs over time to reach consensus on both sides. There are a lot of things that people generally believe is the better path. I think we have to reform health care underneath the entitlement system as well, so that the cost curve is dealt with, which means that we should move towards catastrophic coverage as the form of insurance and reward healthy lifestyle decisions and focus on prevention to lessen costs by improving healthcare outcomes.
Also talking about tax reform, it gets a little tricky here.
Very
mentioning
much.
Specific loopholes that need to be eliminated. What about some specific loopholes that you would like to see eliminated?
If you could get to the lowest possible rate, even if there's 2 or 3 rates rather than just one, you would, and eliminate as many of the deductions as possible, you would, I think, create a boom of economic activity.
You give up something like the mortgage interest deduction for a lower tax rate, or the earned income tax credit for a lower.
Yeah, to me, the better way of doing this would be to say all of the tax code expires. All of the so-called tax expenditures would expire, and that you would have to put them back in. And so you would reverse the dynamic. That to me would be a better approach, because I think people could see the benefits of a simpler code and the empowering nature of that people could keep more of their own money, make decisions for themselves, and not effectively get in line to get their version of some tax expenditure or tax credit but keep what they have and lower the rates significantly. It would create a burst of economic activity for our country.
And real quickly, before we move on to education, I want to just go back to what you talked about, how Romney and Ryan made the election a referendum on President Obama. But I also realized, reading your article, I don't think you mentioned Democrats, liberals, or the president at one time. Obviously, that wasn't a mistake. Are Democrats, Republicans, are they too focused on talking about what the other guy is doing instead of talking about their plan and what they have to offer?
I think we've gotten a little far removed from where we once were not that long ago, which is the party of reform, the party of new thinking, the party of ideas, the party that embraces the future. And it's interesting that you noted that, because there's a reason why in my recent speeches that have garnered some attention in the Newsmax article that I didn't mention the president. Look, the president's record, I think, is on economic policy is a failed one, but we're not going to win the day unless we have a compelling alternative. And that's where I think the focus needs to be.
Is that what you say the campaign kind of got off the rails, is when they did that, as opposed to focusing on the Ryan plan and specific issues and real concrete alternatives?
You know what? There's a lot of reasons why the election turned out the way it did. All I know for sure is that I wish Mitt Romney was president right now, because I think he would be a practical person trying to forge common sense solutions to these big dysfunctional challenges we face.
All right, so let's talk about education. Of course, I remember focusing a lot on this when I was covering local news here in Florida, and you were the governor. Of course, you've continued your pursuit of education excellence as a founder and chairman of the Foundation for Excellence in Education. So in the article, you talk about the need to increase the choices that are available to parents and students for education. How do you do that? What's the best way?
Change laws. We have 50 states that are the governance model, or the catalyst for how governance operates. We have 13,000 government-run monopolies, heavily unionized. And in that kind of setting, it should not be a surprise that the economic interests of the adults is really a dominant part of education life in America today. And my advocacy is to move to a student-centered system. Imagine a system where you customize the learning experience that was competency-based, where you mastered higher level material and you moved on to the next. And if you didn't master it, you don't move on. And there are tools to provide teachers the chance to manage that learning experience with students, so that they gain, greater chances of achieving success. We have a third of our kids that don't make it through the system, even though we spend more per student than any country in the world. And a lot of students could be doing college level work by the time they graduated from high school, but in effect they're held back because we have this adult-centered, homogenized learning model when we should customize it. And that's what the Foundation for Excellence in Education is trying to do, is to help policymakers in our 50 states open up their laws to allow for more innovation to take place.
Does every kid need to go to college, or should we be talking about other alternatives, more focus on trade schools? We need good mechanics, we need good electricians. Do people need to go to college? Are we putting too much emphasis on sending kids to college?
I think we're putting too much emphasis on the college experience, but the country's moving towards Common Core state standards, which are higher, fewer standards that require critical thinking skills, both for going to college as well as for being able to get a job in some technical skill or career-oriented avocation. So the skills necessary for both paths need to be higher. And when we implement these standards, we should have a focus on achieving that. That by the end of 12th grade, young people are 12th grade level, have 12th grade level aptitudes. And then the choices ought to be broader, so that not every child goes to college. Some could get an AS degree or an AA degree in community colleges. Others could immediately go to work and in fact get higher wages than waiting for 4 years, getting a degree that may not be as relevant with huge student debt. I mean, there should be ample options for parents and for students, but we need to raise the bar to a point where a 12th grade level aptitude is required by 12th grade, not a 10th grade level or a 9th grade level or no level at all, which is what we have in education today.
Yeah, sure. We've all heard the stories of people being passed a social promotion, so to speak, in a lot of public school systems. That said, though, over the last 4 or 5 years, in 48 out of the 50 states, public funding for higher education has been cut. At the same time, college tuition has been,
Right.
blowing through the roof. What role does the government have in trying to keep college more affordable?
Well, first of all, on the K-12 side of spending, we still spend more per student than any country in the world. So the idea that somehow money is the driver of success, Florida spends about the national average, slightly less than the national average, and we've had some of the greatest gains in learning over the last decade. As it relates to college, we in effect have seen a decline in most states of state appropriations for our community colleges and four-year degree programs. Dramatic increases in tuition funded by student loans. In effect, the financing of our university system has been indebting students who are increasingly finding it harder to graduate in 4 years. In fact, we measure success rates by the percentage of full-time students that graduate with a four-year degree in 6 years. And it's 60% in the country. And so we indebt these young people. Many times they don't even graduate. They're getting degrees where there are no jobs, and it's a crisis. We have over $1 trillion of public debt.
That's a ticking time bomb, you'd say?
It is. It is the next credit bubble that it's going to have to be dealt with. Maybe there'll be a bailout. Who knows? I mean, I think in the next couple of years that's going to have to be sorted out. But we should be reforming our higher education system, more digital learning, more online learning, greater throughput, where students are given the chance to actually get a four-year degree in 4 years. Professors might have to teach more courses in classes. A shift to a orientation that is more productive, I think, is part of the answer. And a lot of universities are changing because they have to. They have no other options. And this reform, not being driven by Washington, it's being driven out of economic necessity.
I want to move on to a couple other current event issues before we wrap up, talking about the future of the party. You talk in the article about a return to family values as a way to strengthen our economy. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. This is a little dicey politically, but it's really important to recognize that family life in America has changed pretty dramatically. For the first time in American history, there are fewer married women than unmarried women in the age cohort that's measured. We've had dramatic increases in out-of-wedlock birth rates. We have real challenges that make it harder. Every study that I've seen suggests that if a young woman can not have a child before they're married, and they can defer marriage till they're 25, and they can graduate from high school, the chances of them living in poverty is dramatically reduced, and similarly with men. And so family life is a place where there's enormous demands placed on government. And if we get that right, then we can have a chance, I think, of creating economic prosperity over the long haul. If we don't get it right, it really does change who we are as a nation, and it creates enormous strains. Now, I'm not a believer that the government is the place where this will be solved. Governments are good at filling potholes. They're not necessarily that great at dealing with the questions of moral issues or the heart in general. So this has to be collectively, as a people, we have to say that wholesome, loving family life should be one of the organizing principles of our society, and have a conversation about it without being judgmental, and do so in a way that's loving rather than angry, because we have to start talking about this.
You have to win the argument on the moral front and on the economic front as well.
Absolutely.
Governor Jeb Bush, thanks so much for talking to us. The new book is called Immigration Wars. It's available on Amazon and other websites, as well as bookstores, and you can read more about his plan for the future in the April edition of Newsmax magazine. Governor Bush, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for Newsmax.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.